Please.
Thank you, Honorable President. Namaskar. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Honorable the Chief Justice of India and Honorable Judges of the Supreme Court, a very warm welcome to this evening's program as we celebrate the day when the Constitution of India was adopted by the Constituent Assembly on 26 November 1949 and the Constitution came into effect on 26 January 1950. We are honored by the august presence of the Honorable President Shri Ramnath Kovind. May I request Honorable Shri Justice N.V. Ramana to give the welcome address.
Good evening. The Honorable President of India, Sri Ramnath Kovind ji, Honorable Justice S.A. Bobde, the Chief Justice of India, Honorable Sri Ravi Shankar Prasad, Union Minister for Law and Justice and Electronics and Information Technology, my dear brother Justice R.F. Nariman and other Honorable Judges of the Supreme Court, Sri K.K. Venugopal, Attorney General of India, Mr. Tushar Mehta, Solicitor General of India and other law officers, Mr. Dushyant Dave, President of the Supreme Court Bar Association, Shivaji M. Jadhav, President of the Supreme Court Advocates on Record Association, other members of the Bar, staff of the Supreme Court of India, dignitaries, colleagues, media persons and friends. On behalf of the Supreme Court, I would like to welcome to you all to the Constitutional Day celebrations. This 71st Constitutional Day has immense significance in the history of parliamentary democracy. This day reminds us the expectations of our leaders had. It enables us to reflect on what we have achieved so far and what we can be in the future. On this occasion, it is apt to remember the words of Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the President of the Constituent Assembly, in his speech on 26 November 1949. I quote, "It is not my purpose to appraise the value of the work that the Assembly has done, or the merits or demerits of the Constitution which it has framed. I am content to leave that to the others and do to the posterity." Unquote. After 71 years of working under the Indian Constitution, we can state that it is a resounding success. Our Constitution has withstood the test of time and has proven to be the most spirited, compassionate, and living instrument capable of enormous dynamism. The courts have played an important role in ensuring that the rights enshrined in the Constitution are not a dead letter. It is because of these reasons that today we thrive as the largest democracy governed by a written Constitution. Today, our country and the entire world is dealing under the effects of an unprecedented pandemic. It is unfortunate that because of this, we are constrained to meet and organize this event virtually. However, although the pandemic has stalled and hindered all activities throughout the world, our country tried to maintain normalcy in all walks of life. Against all odds, we have tried to ensure that the constitutional goal of social justice is not frustrated. Ultimately, we need to ensure that no one is deprived of justice in this country. Under the Indian Constitution, access to justice is a basic human right. India has one of the best legal aid services in the entire world. This year marks the completion of 25 years since the establishment of National Legal Service Authority. The mandate of our Constitution is to work tirelessly to surpass our own expectations and to ensure that India is a country that sets an example for other countries to follow. It is well recognized that the Constitution of India is the paramount law of the land. All the organs of the state, that is the legislature, the executive and the judiciary, derive their powers and authority from the Constitution itself and must fulfill their constitutional obligations. There is a trend of unfair and unfounded criticisms against our constitutional institutions. Such criticism destroys the public trust, which forms the foundation of democracy. The only answer for this criticism is to work hard to fulfill our constitutional duty. Nothing should deter us from achieving the same. We are extremely fortunate to have with us our Honorable President of India, an accomplished lawyer with more than 22 years at the bar. He has a deep understanding of the Indian legal system and has always been extremely supportive of all our endeavors, for which everyone here is extremely grateful. Apart from the above, during the pandemic, it was heartening to see our president led from the front when he decided to forego a part of salary for the whole year and directed officials to adopt austerity measures in order to mitigate people's economic plight in the wake of pandemic. I must acknowledge the hard work being put by the Honorable Justice S.A. Bobde, the Chief Justice of India here. In spite of the pandemic, he has ensured that the wheels of justice keep on turning. He has embraced newer technologies and has helped the system adapt to the changing times and needs. We are also privileged among us, Sri Ravi Shankar Prasad ji, Honorable Minister of Law and Justice, for his progressive outlook towards strengthening the judicial infrastructure so as to increase the access to justice for all during the pandemic. We are honored to have Honorable Justice R.F. Nariman, who is a hardworking scholarly judge. He played an important role in ensuring the welfare of Supreme Court staff and advocates during these difficult times. We appreciate the presence of Sri Dushyant Dave, President of the Supreme Court Bar Association. It is a well-acknowledged fact that the bar and the bench coexist and share a professional responsibility to strengthen public confidence in the judicial system. The fraternity of this profession has made an immense contribution towards the realization of the constitutional goals. My earnest regards are due to my brother and sister judges who have sworn to preserve the nature of our constitutional values against the tide of times. Before signing off, I would like to thank our scientists, doctors, nursing staff, health workers, sanitization workers, police, and other social service organizations, our Corona warriors who have been working at the forefront. This day is a reminder for the present generation and for generations to come that these rights embodied in our Constitution are our expression of commitment to moral values, aspirations within conflict-ridden pluralistic society. I would like to end with the words of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. I quote, "Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of its social democracy." What does social democracy means? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. Jai Hind, Namaskar, thank you.
Thank you, Lordship. May I now request Shri Dushyant A. Dave, President, Supreme Court Bar Association, to address the audience.
Honorable the President of India, Mr. Ramnath Kovindji, Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Mr. Sharad Bobde, Honorable Minister of Law and Justice, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, Honorable Mr. Justice N.V. Ramna, Honorable Mr. Justice R.F. Nariman, Honorable Distinguished Attorney General of India, Honorable Judges of the Supreme Court of India, Honorable Judges of other High Courts, distinguished senior advocates and other members of the bar, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Supreme Court Bar Association, it is indeed my privilege and pleasure to greet the Honorable President of India on this monumental day. More so because, sir, you are the most distinguished member. Pranams to you. If I may be permitted to say, Honorable President, that you have always inspired and encouraged this bar. I will always cherish your kind words to me on that flight from Delhi to Patna when Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad introduced me to you, then as Governor of Bihar, and you were very kind to acknowledge the role played by the Supreme Court Bar Association, my Executive Committee of 2016, and myself, especially in completion of the Supreme Towers Housing Complex, of which you are a very distinguished member. Sir, it is my deep privilege to welcome you on behalf of my bar. We are equally fortunate that we have in Law Minister not only a very eminent member of the bar, but a very dear friend of this association. On 26 November 1949, the Constituent Assembly, comprising of 299 greatest Indians, met at 10 a.m. in the Constitution Hall in New Delhi. These men and women had begun their task of making Constitution of India on 9th December 1946. They toiled for 2 years, 11 months and 17 days to give generations of Indians the sweetest gift that any nation or civilization can get. We must be grateful to them in eternity. And interestingly, they spent only 63,96,729 rupees over this long period. Dr. Sachidanand Sinha, who inaugurated its proceedings as the first president in December 1946, could not remain present, but sent a very poignant message. And I quote, "To me it's that so much unity and integrity should have evolved in almost all matters, reflecting thereby highest credit on the good sense of the Assembly, and no less resounding to you as highly tactful President. I invoke divine mercy that your labors may be crowned with fullest success, and that the ancient historic land of Bharat may again stand forth great and glorious in the scale of nations." Unquote. Sir, I would say it is this divine Constitution of India which has crowned this nation as the largest democracy in the world, and that it has not only survived for 7 decades, but is thriving in a vibrant democracy. President of the Constituent Assembly and later the first President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad himself, had these prophetic and wise words to say, and I quote, "We have prepared a democratic constitution, but successful working of democratic institution requires in those who have to work them willingness to respect the viewpoints of others, capacity for compromise and accommodation. Many things which cannot be written in a constitution are done by conventions. Let me hope that we shall show these capacities and develop those conventions. The way we have been able to draw this constitution without taking recourse to voting and to divisions in lobbies strengthens that hope." Unquote. Whatever the constitution may or may not provide, he said further, the welfare of the country will depend upon the way in which country is administered. He said that will depend on the men who administer it. It is a tried saying that a country can have only the government it deserves. He further said, therefore in India today I feel that the work that confronts us is even more difficult than the work which we had when we began the struggle. We did not have then any conflicting claims to reconcile, no loaves or fishes to distribute, no power to share. We have all these now, and temptations are really great. Pray to God that we shall have the wisdom and strength to rise above these and to serve the country which we have succeeded in liberating." Unquote. At the end of his address, he said, it now remains to put the motion which was moved by Dr. Ambedkar to the vote of the House. The question is that the Constitution as settled by the Assembly be passed. And the motion was adopted amidst prolonged cheers on that morning. He then formally signed it to give the Constitution an authority so that it can come into force immediately. These were the proceedings on that beautiful morning of 26 November 1949. He then went around and shook hands with members after adjourning the Assembly to January 25th, 1950. Dr. Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee and the most towering personality in drafting of the Constitution, in his address while moving the motion on a day earlier, on 25th November 1949, had administered 3 cardinal principles for future generations of India. And these are extremely wise advice. He said, and I quote, "If we wish to maintain democracy, not merely in form, but also in fact, what do? The first thing in my judgment we must do is to hold fast to constitutional methods of achieving our social and economic objectives. It means we must abandon the bloody methods which John Stuart Mill has given to all who are interested in maintenance of democracy, namely, not to lay their liberties at the feet of even a great man, or to trust him with power which enable him to subvert their institutions. The third thing we must do is not to be content with mere political democracy. We must make our political democracy a social democracy as well. Political democracy. He ended by solemnly invoking, and I quote, "Let us resolve not to be tardy in the recognition of evils that lie across our path and which induce people to prefer government for the people to government by the people, nor to be weak in our initiative to remove them." He then said, "That is the only way to serve the country. I know no better." Been broken up into fragments by narrow and domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country. As Aristotle had once said, and I quote, "The greatest of all means for ensuring the stability of the Constitution is the education of citizens in the spirit of Constitution." Honorable President and distinguished speakers on dais, your profound words spoken today will be part of that education to strengthen the Constitution and love for the Constitution amongst the citizens. Principles which alone can help us achieve that dream of the father of the nation, to make India a place where there would be no poverty, no disease, no ignorance, and no depravity. Nahi daridra koi dukhi, na koi dina, nahi koi abud, na koi lachan hina. Mahatma Gandhi always believed in that. I thank Honorable Chief Justice of India for inviting me to speak on this occasion. On this day, I pray citizen of this country in the wake of this pandemic. I end by saying, may the Constitution of India live eternally. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, sir. May I now call upon Honorable Shri K.K. Venugopal, Attorney General for India, to present his views on this great occasion.
It's okay. Honorable President of India, Shri Ramnath Kovind, Honorable Chief Justice Shri Sharad Arvind Bobde, Justice Ramana, Justice Rohinton Nariman, Honorable Shri Ravi Shankar Prasad, Minister for Law and Justice, President Bishant Dave, Office Bearers of the Supreme Court Bar Association, the Solicitor General of India, Shri Tushar Mehta, other law officers, my colleagues, and friends at the bar. We are lucky that we are having the first citizen of the country to preside over this function, the Constitution Day. So far as the President is concerned, he was a member of our bar for a long number of years, and he has not forgotten that. And every time we request him to come and attend any of our meetings, he always willingly and happily comes. And this is one great thing about the President, Shri Ramnath Kovind. We are facing a crisis today because of COVID-19. And this has impacted the normal functioning of each one of the three organs of the state. And we find that so far as the justice delivery system is concerned, it has not allowed itself to be beaten by this pandemic. On the other hand, we have ensured and swiftly adapted ourselves to the environment created by this disease or by this pandemic or this pathogen to ensure that the doors of justice remain open to the people of the country. The physical presence in the court is done away with because we lawyers cannot possibly stand next to each other and argue cases when the rule is that you have to keep this distance and we have to wear masks. And to argue with masks, I think, is not an easy alternative. But however, we have innovated, we have found an alternative. And the alternative is video conferencing. And video conferencing has worked extremely well so far. And I believe that the Supreme Court alone has disposed of about 30 lakhs cases, which I think is really a superb record. But what I find is this: the Gujarat High Court has also innovated, and it is not only having video conferencing, it's also having live streaming of the arguments going on in court. For I have watched the Gujarat High Court, the Chief Justice's Court, where I've seen the lawyers arguing, and I find that they're extremely competent lawyers, and they are arguing with a balanced tone of voice. They don't raise their voice and shout, which I think is a very refreshing thing to listen to. But more than that, I find that I have been watching the Supreme Court of England and Wales. They are having video conferencing. And the result of that is, if you are having live streaming, it means that the whole world can listen to whatever is being argued. And I can envision one day with the law minister being present, he's also in charge of telecommunications and so on, internet, where every single subordinate court in this country, every high court, will have not only in every court hall, will have video streaming as well, video conferencing, video streaming. And this is not something which has to be stopped once we are able to get rid of this wretched COVID and when it goes away. It's something which we should have as part of the new norm, which we will be following for the long future to come. And this, I think, will be the plus point that we have learned the use of video conferencing, because I find that when I have to now take instructions from the officers of the government, I insist upon video conferencing, and I'm able to function as easily as if they're sitting across me on the across the table. And therefore, this is something which we will have to now have as a future new norm, so that it will be permanently the manner in which the courts in India will be functioning. I have only one thing to say, and this I have been repeating more than once, and this is about the Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court is the apex court of the country. It is a constitutional court, and it is supposed to deal with matters of great national importance and constitutional importance. But today we find that the Supreme Court of India is dealing with matrimonial cases, rent control cases, landlord and tenant, bail applications, then land acquisition cases, and so on. For there are 400 different categories which the Supreme Court is dealing with the Supreme Court or the apex courts of other countries do not touch, because that has to be gain finality at the lower court level. Now, the result is that we are having arrears, rather sadly, arrears for a very long time, including even in criminal cases. Now, this can be got rid of. We can start with a clean slate if the Supreme Court regains its stature as an apex court of the country and restricts itself to the constitutional cases and cases of national importance, in which case we will have only about 2,000 to 3,000 cases a year instead of the 75,000 or 56,000 cases that it has today. Now, this does not mean that the cases should end finally with the high courts, because we find that some other high courts are not very consistent in their approach to cases. On the other hand, what I would think is have intermediate courts of appeal. At least 20 to 25 common law countries have courts of appeal in between the high courts and the apex court of the country. And these courts of appeal will decide all these 400 categories of cases finally, without any further appeal to anybody else. And the judges who will be managed will be of the same caliber as Supreme Court judges, elevated from the high courts by the collegium in the same manner that is being done today. And if this is done, we can see a new Supreme Court where the judges have leisure, where they hear patiently and read and write judgments, because as it is today, they read the briefs right up till midnight. And I think they are straining themselves far more than what the judges should do. And if this is done, and of course it would require an amendment of the Constitution, I think we would be having a very excellent justice delivery system with the subordinate courts, the High Court, a court of appeal in between, of the same caliber as the Supreme Court, finally deciding cases without a further appeal to the Supreme Court. And this, I think, would be what we should try for. Today, so far as the Supreme Court is concerned, a research scholar from Yale had researched and found that the majority of cases in the Supreme Court come from the northern states. From Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, etc., there's only a handful of cases in comparison, 1.1% and 2%. The reason this is the distance and the lack of their being able to decide as to how to engage counsel and conduct their cases and so on. Therefore, if you have in the 4 regions in the country, 4 courts of appeal consisting of 15 judges each, then in such a case, access to justice will be easy, and the litigant public will be able to come up from the High Court with an appeal to a court of appeal to finally decide, have their cases decided in the very close distance. And this will be a great future for so far as they are concerned. It was Dean Roscoe Pound who said in 1906, we may look forward to a new future when our courts will be swift and certain agents of justice. I'm afraid the courts today are not swift. And it is Martin Luther King who said, injustice anywhere would be a threat to justice everywhere. And this is for the simple reason that if you have to wait for 30 years, 20 years to have your case finally disposed of, then I think it's a case where justice has failed the poor litigant public, the middle class, the lower middle class. Because so far as the corporates are concerned, they have no problem. They can afford it, they can wait, and they will be able to reach the Supreme Court without difficulty. Therefore, let us collectively ensure, and that's how we've done this, so that our justice delivery system is able to wipe away every tear from every eye. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts on this momentous occasion. May I now request Honorable Union Minister for Law and Justice and Electronics and Information Technology, Shri Ravi Shankar Prasad, to share his thoughts.
Mahamahim Rashtrapati, Shraddheya Shri Ramnath Kovind ji, Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Shri S.A. Bobde, this is Ramana, this is Nariman, Attorney General Mr. Venugopal, Solicitor General Mr. Tushar Mehta, other distinguished Supreme Court judges, my good friend Dushyant Dave, President of the Supreme Court Bar Association, distinguished dignitaries. My greetings to all of you on this great Constitution Day, which we are celebrating digitally and not physically. For obvious reasons, we are having a great pandemic, which has afflicted not only India, but the entire globe. So the biggest challenge which humanity has faced in the last close to 100 years. But in spite of this great challenge, I think there is a scope for great opportunity. And the Supreme Court and the law courts of India rose to great heights, Rashtrapati Ji. As I shared a data just before in the function organized by the Supreme Court Bar Association, during this pandemic, Supreme Court till October heard about 30,000 cases digitally. All the high courts of India heard about 13.74 lakhs cases digitally. And all the district courts of India heard about 35.93 lakh cases digitally. Therefore, close to 50 lakh cases have been heard from the Supreme Court to the High Court to the District Court during this period. I'm not talking about the tribunals and the other virtual courts, etc. And in that, I wish to compliment, as the Law Minister of India, the Chief Justice of India, all the judges of Supreme Court, the law officers, the lawyers, the staff, High Court Chief Justice, judges, District Court judges, who really rose to the occasion and in spite of very inhibiting circumstances, through digital platforms, continued the justice delivery. And again, handling the IT and communication portfolio, Rashtrapati Ji, the kind of stellar initiatives which the Chief Justice of India has taken in expansion of our technological footprint all over the country with 16,000 digital courts and other e-filing, etc., is a matter of great assurance. But apart from that, the great social commitment which the judiciary has shown in taking care of the needy, right from the Supreme Court to the Supreme Court Bar Association to the High Court to the District Court, is also a matter of great appreciation. Therefore, what should I say today except to remember a fundamental duty of ours, that care for others too, while remember you're right, but Corona teaches us, be also cognizant of your duty towards others. I think that's the first thing I need to reflect today. Yes, the journey of 71 years, what it has shown, India has emerged as a mature democracy, fully vindicating the trust of our founding fathers who entrusted ordinary Indians with the task of nation building, regardless of their income, education, caste, community, region or language. And ordinary Indians rose to the occasion who knew their power, they can change government by their franchise. And the sheer diversity of India with 1.3 billion population clearly holds the firm foundation of democratic polity through our elections and free and fair exercise. The second thing which we all need to recall, as very rightly pointed out, that our founding fathers were equally cognizant of our heritage. They rejected the concept of the British Empire and their propagators. The idea of India was given by them. And therefore, when they framed the constitution, they consciously and deliberately decided to keep in the original constitution the cultural, civilizational heritage of India, whether it is the Vedic life or the story of Ram or Krishna or other great, from Ashoka to Akbar to many others, to Mahatma Gandhi, to Subhash Chandra Bose, to Shivaji, that this heritage must form integral part of our original constitution, sketched by the famous painter Nandlal Bose. I think when 71 years we have completed, these great legacies of non-violence, of commitment to freedom, commitment to equality needs to be remembered with all greater force. I wish to compliment Mahamahin Rashtrapati Ji, the stellar role of the Supreme Court of India as a beacon of freedom, as an arbiter of disputes, and as an institution which has also taken due notice of the nobler instincts of our constitution to foster equality. And as I said earlier, let me repeat in your presence, post-freedom, all the challenges which could arise anywhere in the world also arose in India, from caste conflict to communal conflict to regional conflict, to language conflict, to everything. And here was the Supreme Court, which came with judgment which the people of India accepted, and that we all respect. The second thing I would like to really comment today of the innovation which Supreme Court did, an injunction against arbitrariness. If Article 21 leads to denial through procedure established by law, by insisting that procedure must be fair, reasonable and just. Coming with the new innovation of basic structure, also imposing limitations on lawmaking, etc. We all applaud these innovations. But about basic structure, I need to reflect only one thing. The basic structure has to be seen in totality. Independence of judiciary is very, very important. Separation of power is equally relevant, as are other basic structure which has to be seen in totality. Of late, I see a lot of criticism of judiciary. Indian judiciary from day one has always welcomed criticism. Why not? Fair criticism. There has been very recurrent criticism of the institution of collegium and appointment of judges, with which some of us also share our views. But that is a different part, while giving due respect to these institutions. But of late, I see a trend, which is a disturbing trend. And what is that trend? I need to flag that today. The trend is, some people have a view as to how on a particular case to be filed or which has been filed, a judgment should come. And then there are narratives in newspapers. There are campaigns in the social media as to what kind of judgment should come. And if the judgment is not in accord with that, then there is a further sweeping criticism. I would say, if judiciary has to be independent, judges have to be left completely free to decide the cases in accordance with law. Because I don't think the founding fathers ever conceived, Mahamahim Rashtrapati ji, that justice delivery should play to the gallery. That I think we need to all acknowledge. And therefore today, with very gently I must commend that expressions like judicial barbarism is totally unacceptable, regardless of the stature of those who mention these things about our judiciary. We need to be proud of our judiciary. They have really held the hands of the poor underprivileged. There can be some shortcomings. We need to work together to improve. But unleashing criticisms which transgresses the boundary of propriety is something which we all need to reflect upon. Having said that, in conclusion, what is my take today, Mahamahim Rashtrapati ji? Today, on the Constitution Day, let me make an appeal to the entire country and let the judiciary also take a lead in that. Corona is there. Vaccine is likely to come whenever it comes. But let us make a proper commitment. Whenever the vaccine arrives, the medical fraternity, the doctors, the nurses, the supporting staff must be the beneficiary of that vaccine in the very first instance. It is their effort, heroic effort, which has saved so many lives. That is what we owe to themselves. And I think if we make a unanimous resolve, that will be the finest tribute to our fundamental duty as enshrined in our Constitution. Namaskar. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Honorable Shri Justice Sharad Arvind Bobde, the Chief Justice of India, to address the audience.
The Honorable the President of India, Shri Ramnath Kovind ji, who I would like to also alternatively address as possibly the most famous advocate in India. Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, the Honorable Minister for Law and Justice, my esteemed colleague, Justice Ramana, Justice Rohinton Nariman, Shri K.K. Venugopal, the Attorney General for India, Shri Dushyant Dave, the President of the Supreme Court Bar Association, Shri Shivaji Yadav, President SCORA, senior advocates, ladies, gentlemen. I am privileged to be here today on the occasion commemorating the adoption of our Constitution, which was enacted over 7 decades ago. The Indian Constitution gives an identity to more. It protects their lives and guides their destiny. As challenging as this year has been with the coronavirus as the global black swan event, courts in India too have experienced some unprecedented challenges. This pandemic has been the biggest challenge in delivering an unhampered and effective justice, access to justice to the common man. Very early on, when the pandemic struck, we became aware that the effects of the virus had the potential to threaten the rule of law itself and completely block out access to the justice system. There had to be an instant mutation in the justice delivery system, and the choice was very clear: either to switch to virtual hearing through video conferencing, or the other option, to shut down the courts completely. Throughout the ongoing pandemic, the court had to deal with difficult situations pertaining to migrant workers, woefully inadequate facilities for treatment of dying men and women, dead bodies not receiving burial for fear of infection, inadequate hospital beds, and unaffordable costs of treatment. Faced with the choice between continuing incarceration of prisoners and subjecting them to the risk of infection and death, the decision was taken to simply release them, even those undergoing incarceration in detention centers in Assam. The adaptation to hearing matters through video conferencing has given rise, as I said in the bar function, to a new kind of inequality. It was difficult to anticipate this, and it is extremely difficult to deal with it because we are caught in a bind. That inequality arose because access to justice has become technology dependent. It has become difficult for those who do not have access to technology to gain access to justice. I would draw urgent attention of the Honorable Law Minister, who is also Minister for Technology, to see if there is some way this can be remedied. Of course, it might be at great cost to the government. And all this in circumstances where advocates, litigants, judges, and court staff are apprehensive of their safety, and often justifiably so. To make matters worse, we noticed an unexpected rise in instances of rage and extreme depression amongst those staffing the system. The Supreme Court had to take an unprecedented initiative by establishing a Center for Mental Health, manned by experts. If the courts had not suspended normal functioning as they did from March, no doubt the virus would have spread like wildfire amongst lawyers, clerks, court staff, and even the judges. It is not a very pleasant thing to announce, but today the Supreme Court is suffering the most because of the coronavirus. While comparisons are odious, I am proud to say our courts have performed better than many courts over the world. When courts in many other countries have been talking about disposing of cases in single digits, we have hundreds of thousands of cases disposed of by the Supreme Court and the High Courts, mainly dealing with fundamental rights. The figures have been given by Sri Ravi Shankar Prasad. In the Supreme Court, 14,849 cases, in the High Court, 1.5 lakhs cases, and in the subordinate courts, 4.5 lakhs cases were disposed of since the lockdown measures were taken. I must take this opportunity to acknowledge the unstinted cooperation and devotion to duty exhibited by not only judges of the Constitution Courts, but also by judges of the subordinate judiciary and the staff of the registry, whose courage in coming to court and maintaining their functions is exemplary. I must also acknowledge the extraordinary cooperation rendered to the court by the Supreme Court Bar Association and the other bar associations. The Constitution which we celebrate today is the Suprema Lex. The idea of the rule of law, which originated much earlier in ancient traditions of India, along with modern jurisprudence from the West, is embodied in every aspect of the Constitution. Dr. Radhakrishnan, while supporting the Objectives Resolution moved by Jawaharlal Nehru in the Assembly said, Constituent Assembly said, Dharma, righteousness, is the king of kings. It is the ruler of both the people and the rulers themselves. It is the sovereignty of the law we have asserted. Dr. Ambedkar, speaking on the restrictive clauses, expounded the supremacy of the Constitution in the following words. In fact, the purpose of a Constitution is not merely to create organs of the state, but to limit their authority, because if no limitation is imposed upon the authority of organs, there will be complete tyranny and complete oppression. The legislature may be free to frame any law. The executive may be free to make any decision, and the Supreme Court may be free to give any interpretation of the law. It would result in utter chaos. It is with this ethos of our Constitution that the judiciary has over 70 years discharged its duty of the sentinel on the qui-way. The Constitution indeed divides the organs of governance into the legislature, executive, and the judiciary based on the theory of separation of powers. All three branches of the state, the legislature, executive, and the judiciary, have an integral part in securing the rule of law. The timeless principles of the Constitution, justice, liberty, and equality cannot exist without the rule of law. While acknowledging this division of powers, what must be noted is that the theory of separation powers does not contemplate a rivalry or an antagonism between these organs in the exercise of power. The separation of powers is a separation of functions, and there is a complete unity of the constitutional goals amongst all the organs. Separate goals are not set for different organs of the state. As the Supreme Court has observed on various occasions, including in the Keshanand Bharti case, the three organs are meant to operate in harmony. Day in and day out, the courts are called upon to determine questions relating to the right to equality, right to freedom, right to religion, right against exploitation, cultural and educational rights, the limits of the executive and legislative powers, issues of privileges, and a dazzling array of other issues. The adjudication of rights necessarily involves the assertion of correlative duties. Indeed, in law, as any student of jurisprudence knows, one cannot imagine rights vested in a person without a correlative duty on the person against whom it is availed. Mr. Fali Nariman, the eminent jurist, has noted that written constitutions do not function on their own, and a special effort has to be made by its custodians to work them. Presumably, this observation was based on what Dr. Ambedkar famously said: "I feel however good a constitution may be, it is sure to turn out bad, because those who are called to work it happen to be a bad lot." However bad a constitution may be, it may turn out to be good if those who are called to work it happen to be a good lot. This is a clear exhortation to us in the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary to turn out to be a good lot. It is said that the most important role for ensuring constitutional resilience was played by the Supreme Court. In Keshwanand Bharti case, where the court developed the basic structure doctrine, which would protect the core values of democracy, equality, liberty, and dignity from future assaults by the executive or the legislature. In the preface to Basu's commentary, Justices Chandrachud and Subbarami observed that when India's neighbors were still wallowing under political oppression and economic underdevelopment, India itself had done very well through its constitution. Civilizations that do not learn from history are condemned to repeat it. We have a country of more than 1 billion people, a bewildering mass of personal laws, the diversity of both peoples and languages, the heterogeneity of legal standards. The challenges faced by the Indian judiciary at present are unlike those faced by most other judiciaries around the world. However, I believe that a bright future is guaranteed under our constitution. Time and again, there have been serious and long-lasting threats to our constitution. The rich history of our constitution bears a reminder to several such occasions on which the durability and resilience of the constitution was tested. And on all occasions, the constitution came out without much damage. At the core of this conception of constitutional resilience are fundamental rights, such as rights to dignity and life. A scholar described a resilient constitution as a constitution of absolute values that does not yield to countervailing considerations and is not vulnerable to the ebbs and flows of politics and transient majorities. It is entrenched to protect it from change through the ordinary lawmaking process. Indeed, parts of it may be unamendable and eternal. I am reminded of a warning given by Justice Hidayatullah, my distinguished predecessor, in one of his judgments about the attitude towards breaches in law. He said, if we condone an evil as a necessary evil, it becomes more and more necessary and less evil. It is time we reminded ourselves about it. I dare say our courts have learnt quickly and learnt well to preserve a resilient constitution. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Lordship. May I now request the Honorable President, Shri Ramnath Kovind, to deliver the inaugural address.
Chief Justice of India, Justice Sarad Arvind Bobde, Union Minister for Law and Justice, Sri Ravi Shankar Prasad, distinguished judges of the Supreme Court, Attorney General of India, Sri K.K. Venugopal, distinguished members of the bar, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to be speaking with you on the occasion of the Constitution Day. I would have been happier to interact with you all in person, but the pandemic has imposed restrictions on us. Today is the 71st anniversary of the adoption of our Constitution. Since 1979, the legal fraternity had been celebrating November 26 as Law Day every year on a call by the Supreme Court Bar Association. In 2015, commemorating Baba Saheb Ambedkar's 125th birth anniversary, the government decided to celebrate November 26 as the Constitution Day. I believe we are blessed in having our founding document drafted by the great visionary leaders of our freedom movement. They were conscious of the fact that they were writing the collective future of the nation only on behalf of the people at large. Not only is democracy at the heart of the Constitution, the Constituent Assembly itself was formed in a democratic manner. It had popular representation from across the country and included some path-breaking women among its members too. People also took great interest in the lively debates of the Constituent Assembly. Over 53,000 citizens sat in the visitors' gallery over a period close to 3 years and watched the debates according to the records. Thus, what we have before us is, if I may say so, a document truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. To paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, I can say with conviction that this document, a creation of Indian genius and ingenuity, too shall not perish from earth as citizens continue to repose faith in it. Ladies and gentlemen, our Constitution is said to be the lengthiest document of its kind. But then, as the President of the Constituent Assembly, Rajan Babu, rightly observed, its bulk is not an issue if its provisions are well thought out. This spirit of the epic of our times, however, is elegantly captured in the preamble. In mere 85 words, it spells out the core values that propelled the freedom struggle, the vision of our founding fathers, the dreams and aspirations of every Indian. Many of these solemn words were discussed threadbare by the learned members on 17th October 1949. The preamble has rightly been seen as the heart of the Constitution, and at its core are certain values. They are justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. This is the moral compass of our journey together to a glorious future. Dr. Ambedkar, as chairman of the drafting committee, spoke eloquently about their significance in his concluding speech. I quote, "What does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. These principles of liberty, equality and fraternity are not to be treated as separate items in a trinity. They form a union of trinity in the sense that to divorce one from the other is to defeat the very purpose of democracy." Unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, the task before us is to recognize these noble ideals as a way of life. That is, to translate these words into everyday acts. What does it imply for the judiciary? The preamble speaks of the resolve to secure for all its citizens social, economic, and political justice. At the risk of repeating myself, I reiterate that the notion of justice itself implies access to justice. In other words, justice can be secured only to the extent that it can be accessed. Improving access to justice for all is, of course, a work in progress. It is bound to be by its very nature. The hurdles in the way are many, the cost being the topmost among them. In that regard, I have spoken before of my passion for pro bono service. I am glad that I had the opportunity to provide free counsel to the needy when I was a practicing lawyer. Another hurdle has been the language, and on this count, I am pleased that the higher judiciary has started making available its judgments in more and more regional languages. This is surely the best way to keep more and more citizens in the loop and thus bringing the institution of judiciary closer to the citizenry at large. Solutions, on the other hand, are numerous too. Technology is emerging as the foremost among them, more so now as we grapple with the restrictions the pandemic has imposed on us. I am happy to see that the Supreme Court has continued to function and dispense justice amid the pandemic using technological solutions like video conferencing and e-filing. I commend the bar, the bench, and the officials for not letting the coronavirus come in the way of fulfilling the duty of securing justice for all. The compulsion induced by COVID-19 can indeed help us further in finding more creative ways to fulfill that task and augment the access to justice. Ladies and gentlemen, on this solemn occasion, let us further ponder upon the task of making the noble ideals part of our lives. I recall the words of Rajan Babu, the first among my illustrious presidents. On 24th January 1950, the Constituent Assembly met for the last time. It was during this sitting that Dr. Rajendra Prasad's name was announced as the first President of India. Responding to cheers and congratulations from the fellow members, the stalwart freedom fighter said, and I quote, "I have always held that the time for congratulation is not when a man is appointed to an office, but when he retires. And I would like to wait until the moment comes when I have to lay down the office which you have conferred on me to see whether I have deserved the confidence and the goodwill which have been showered on me from all sides and by all friends alike." Unquote. Rajan Babu probably had in mind the timeless lines of Sant Kabir, who spoke of returning the covering cloth to the maker in the same condition without spoiling it. Das Kabir jatan kari udhi jiu ki tyo dhar dini chadariya. That, I believe, is an appropriate image to keep in mind to guide our conduct in public life. Should this not be the aspiration of those holding high constitutional posts. We should strive to set an example, always rising above partisanship and prejudices. These observations of Rajan Babu applies to all of us. While discharging my responsibilities, I have always tried to hold his words as guiding mantra for me. Let us introspect how we can better live up to the ideals of the founding fathers, as enshrined in the Constitution in general and the preamble in particular. Ladies and gentlemen, the Supreme Court of India has earned a reputation for its superior standards and lofty ideals. Landmark judgments passed by this court have strengthened the legal and constitutional framework of our country. Its bench and the bar are known for their intellectual depth and legal scholarship. I am confident that this court would always remain the sentinel of justice. I wish the Chief Justice and the judges of the Supreme Court the very best for the future. I also wish very best to members of the Supreme Court bar who are regarded officers of the court for their fruitful future. I am thankful to you for giving me the opportunity to share my views. I congratulate you all on this Constitution Day. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Honorable President. May I now request Honorable Shri Justice R.F. Nariman, Judge, Supreme Court of India, to give the vote of thanks.
Honorable President of India, Shri Ramnath Kovind, the Chief Justice of India, Sharad Bobde, Honorable Minister for Law, Ravi Shankar Prasad, Honorable Justice Ramanna, my brothers and sisters, Honorable Attorney General for India, Shri K.K. Venugopal, Shri Dushyant Dave, President SCBA, Shri Jadhav, President SCORA, ladies and gentlemen. Today's vote of thanks is in remembrance of the founding fathers of this great constitution of ours, which has endured for the last 70 years and hopefully will endure in the future. The original draft of the constitution consisted of 240 articles, courtesy Benegal Narsingh Rao, who put together the first draft of the constitution. This draft was then worked upon by the drafting committee of the Constituent Assembly, now becoming a draft constitution consisting of 315 articles. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee, made a detailed speech on the 4th of November 1948, drawing attention to the important features of the draft constitution and dealing with certain criticisms leveled against it. Dr. Ambedkar asked two questions that any student of constitutional law is sure to ask. First, what is the form of government that is envisaged by the Constitution? And second, what form will the Constitution itself take? In answering these two questions, the draft Constitution proposed the parliamentary system of government as was followed in the UK, as opposed to the presidential form of government as followed in the United States. Going on to expound upon the form which the Constitution will take, he made it clear that the Indian Constitution is federal in nature, being a dual polity with a single citizenship. It is only when threats arise to the stability of the nation from without or from within that a presidential proclamation can then transform the state from being a federation into becoming a unitary state. As a result, the speech ended with the words, I feel it is workable, flexible, strong enough to hold the country together, both in peace and war. Indeed, if I may say so, if things go wrong under the new constitution, the reason will not be that we had a bad constitution. What we will have to say is that man was vile. 1 year after this famous speech was delivered on 26 November 1949, the Constituent Assembly took up the third reading of the constitution. On this occasion, Dr. Ambedkar made a speech in which he mentioned the labor that had been undergone to produce the Constitution of India, spreading over almost 3 years of intense work, borrowing from constituents from all over the world and adapting principles derived from them to the genius of the people of India. He stated how the United States took only 4 months to draft its small constitution, Canada 2.5, Australia 9, and South Africa 1 year. As many as 2,473 amendments to the draft constitution were considered. In a significant passage in his speech, Dr. Ambedkar warned that the good work put in to draft such a constitution would all be lost unless those who man it turn out to be good themselves. This has been adverted to by the learned Chief Justice. Dr. Rajendra Prasad then made a speech, after which the constitution was formally adopted. Echoing Dr. Ambedkar's views relating to the constitution being a lifeless thing dependent upon the men who control and operate it, these were his words of wisdom. Whatever the constitution may or may not provide, the welfare of the country will depend upon the way in which the country is administered. That will depend upon the men who administer it. It is a trite saying that the country can have only the government it deserves. Our constitution has provisions in it which appear to some to be objectionable from one point or another. We must admit that the defects are inherent in the situation in the country and the people at large. If the people who are elected are capable and men of character and integrity, they would be able to make the best even of a defective constitution. If they are lacking in these, the constitution cannot help the country. After all, a constitution, like a machine, is a lifeless thing. It acquires life because of the men who control it and operate it. And India needs today nothing more than a set of honest men who will have the interest of the country before them. There is a fissiparous tendency arising out of various elements in our life. We have communal differences, caste differences, language differences, provincial differences, and so forth. It requires men of strong character, men of vision, men who will not sacrifice the interests of the country at large for the sake of smaller groups and areas, and who will rise over prejudices which are born of these differences. We can only hope the country will throw up such men in abundance. Ending his speech with a reference to the father of the nation, he then said, Mahatma Gandhi laid stress on the purity of methods which had to be pursued for attaining our ends. Let us not forget that this teaching has eternal value and was not intended only for the period of stress and struggle, but has as much authority and value today as it ever had before. We have a tendency to blame others for everything that goes wrong and not to introspect and try to see if we have any share in it or not. It is very much easier to scan one's own actions and motives if one is inclined to do so, than to appraise correctly the actions and motives of others. I shall only hope that all those whose good fortune it may be to work this constitution in future will remember that it was a unique victory which we achieved by the unique method taught to us by the father of the nation. And it is up to us to preserve and protect the independence that we have won, and to make it really bear fruit for the man in the street. Let us launch on this new enterprise of running our independent republic with confidence, with truth and non-violence, and above all, with heart within and God overhead. I would be remiss if I were not to remember the great judges of the past who, like the great Chief Justice John Marshall in the United States, have made the Constitution work, maintaining the delicate balance of power between the three great branches of government. Three outstanding judges of the past need special mention: Chief Justice Bijan Kumar Mukherjee, Chief Justice Subbarao, and Justice Krishna Iyer. Chief Justice Mukherjee was part of the very first Supreme Court of India, and through his outstanding judgments gave great importance to the fundamental rights chapter of the Constitution, expounded upon the vast jurisdiction of the apex court itself under Article 136 of the Constitution, and delineated the executive function as being the residue after the legislative and the judicial functions are taken away. Chief Justice Subbarao will be remembered for his brilliant analytical judgments expanding fundamental rights. Many of his dissents later became law in important areas such as privacy and reservation. He also set the limits of Parliament both in its constituent and legislative capacity, as he was obviously a prophet before his time. Justice Krishna Iyer, with his inimitable style, ushered in what we may call poverty jurisprudence, making the Constitution percolate down to the poorest and weakest citizen of India. Also, he ushered in the era of reformative justice, suggesting transcendental meditation and yoga as agents which heal criminally diseased minds. To all of these great human beings, then, is a debt due of gratitude, which we simply cannot repay. If only we follow in the footsteps of the father of our nation and these great human beings, we have nothing to fear. After all, in India's tryst with destiny, we have chosen to be wedded to the rule of law as laid down by the Constitution of India. Let every person remember that the holy book is the Constitution of India. And it is with this book in hand that the citizens of India march together as a nation, so that they may move forward in all spheres of human endeavor to achieve the great goals set out therein. Thank you.
Thank you, Lordship. Honorable President, may we conclude the program?
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable President. Thank you.
चला जाओ बंद कर